It's Wellness Wednesdays. It's Wellness Wednesdays. And I thought I'd do more on shame because I talked about, shame and the unique shame that men feel on Manly Monday. And it got a lot of response. And it got some response from women who said, I never saw it from the other side, but they related to a lot of it with the shame spiral, with the whole thing. And shame is a very specific thing that is profoundly not good for our ability to accurately read situations and navigate the world. And so I think I'm going to be doing a lot on shame in the coming weeks because I am not excited that so many people feel shame. I am, however, excited about how well this framework is working to explain some of the things that, traditionally get dismissed as sexism or misogyny or racism or all that stuff. More on that in a bit. If you like this sort of content, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. There is currently a wait list for people who would like subsidized Leanna Care sessions. So, and part of that is to do with shame. But yeah, shame is different than guilt. And this is where we get into definitions. And different people have different names for different feelings. And if your names for your feelings don't match up to this, that potato, right? As long as you have different names for different states of being, I had a mood once I named Fred, right? Because it's a Fred mood. Fred. I feel like the way the word Fred sounds, right? But there is a difference between feeling bad and it being motivating and feeling bad and it being demotivating. And shame is the latter. So whatever you call it, I demarcate accountability, guilt, and shame, with accountability being the most productive of those states, guilt being in the middle, but still possibly motivating, and then shame, right? Because guilt is, I feel bad for showing up late. I inconvenience my friends. I gotta get it together. Whereas accountability is more, I showed up late. I need to leave 10 minutes early next time. Accountability is solutions driven. Like, I'm not going to feel bad about this. I'm going to solve the fucking problem. Whereas, see, that's why I like Wellness Wednesday as opposed to It's Not Therapy. I can swear on Wellness Wednesday. It's cathartic. But shame, the same, I was late. It's, I'm such a loser. I just can't get it together. I can't get anything right. That's shame, right? Shame is that point where it's not, I did a bad thing. Shame is, I am a bad thing. And the stuff that I talked about on Manly Monday about, men feeling a unique form of shame, women feel shame about different things. And apparently, men and women don't even process shame the same way. People at different ages don't process and manifest shame in the same way. And shame is very, very hard to shake. Guilt, you can make corrections and overcome the guilt, right? You stop doing the thing that's making you feel guilty. You don't feel guilty anymore. But shame stays with you. Now, a lot of the times they coexist, but again, my differentiation is between I did a bad thing and I am a bad thing. So apparently, according to various science things, going back to a German team in 2010. It's interesting. It was a German team, but it studied people in the U.S. Was it German? I don't know. They don't actually say. Never mind. Why did I think it was German? Okay. But anyway, I'll link to this article. But they measured between the ages of 13 and 89, and it was 2,600 volunteers. And they found that, no surprise, adolescents are most prone to shame. It decreases on average, not for everybody, through adulthood till about 50, and then creeps back up again later in life. Now, it makes sense that when adolescents, teenagers are more likely to feel shame because their identities are not fully formed yet. That makes sense. It's harder to distinguish between I did a bad thing and I am a bad thing when you don't know what I am completely means, right? Now, what happens when someone is in such a state of shame that it stops the development, right? Because we know shame first erodes self-esteem, then erodes self-confidence. Then erodes self-concept. And so people exist in a perpetual state of self-contempt. So, for people who overcome their shame, they heal, they continue to develop. But people who are profoundly shamed get stuck. And the other thing about shame in young adults is teenagers and young adults, there are a lot more norms in society that apply to teens and young adults. When you get older, you hit a major patch of I don't give a fuck. You become more you become more self-sufficient, and so you have to care less. But also, as you get older, you start not being able to fulfill those societal ideals, and so you don't feel the same pressure. You get over it and you're like, whatever, I'm just gonna be me. But that's assuming, and then of course in old age, people become less self-sufficient. They become more reliant on others. Their bodies start breaking down in a very real way, and the shame comes back. Also cognitive decline, so on and forth. You can understand the rise and fall there, right? And I mean, the other thing we have to consider is that getting very old is a fairly new thing for us to deal with as humans. When old age security went in at 65, the average life expectancy was 61. An old age pension was for the very old. We don't really consider 65 very old anymore. People are vital well into their 80s now if you take care of yourself and stay plugged in. And so the entirety of the human experience is sort of stretched. And like I said, this is a study from 2010. I wouldn't be surprised if there were radically different results today, because that was pre-subprime mortgage bust. And that really changed culture in a lot of ways, because all of those tangibles that a lot of people had accumulated to give themselves a sense of worth were taken from them. And you guys, those of you who have watched this channel for quite a while know that I really believe that the subprime mortgage bust, the whole Fannie Mae Freddie Mac credit default swaps thing, I really do think it fed the current culture war, because when you take those trappings from people, all that's left is their sense of pride, and they will fight to the death to keep that when other things have been stripped from them, because shame is the mind killer. And when we look at things from a paradigm of shame, when we make the assumption that that asshole that's coming at you is coming at you from a sense of deep shame, all of a sudden things start to make a lot more sense. And I find you don't get sucked in to the emotion of something the same way you do if you think, oh, they're evil, oh, they're bad. They're spending enough time thinking they're bad for the both of you. You don't have to do it for them. This is somebody deep in shame. And it manifests in some interesting ways, because the one I found interesting is that men feel shame when they don't know certain things that men should know, right? The example they gave is the big names on your local sports team. Now I extrapolate that because this channel, I know a lot of y'all don't give a shit about sports ball. When I start going on about Raptors basketball, people are like, we're not interested in this. Fair. I like hockey too. And CFL football. But yeah, the equivalent, right, is facts about games or comic books. The continuity of Marvel comics is some people's sports statistics, right? And it was funny because we were visiting with friends over the weekend, and the guy was a former minor league ball player. And so he said something, and I'm like, thanks for the assist, man. Thanks for the assist. And I almost said, this is going on your KD ratio. And at the last minute, I realized he doesn't know what that is. So I said, this is going on your stat sheet. And he just thought that was hilarious, right? But it's the same thing, right? Okay, this puts the whole nerd check and the thing that, women in geek spaces complain about in a whole new light. Because something can't have a sexist intent if a guy thinks it's done to everyone. People nerd check because they've been nerd checked. I have too many nerds. I can't. You guys know me. I just shit comes out of me. Like, which Marvel continuity are we talking about? Are we talking about pre-crisis or post-crisis DC? Like, I made a Light Cycles from Tron reference on Twitter the other day, and I played that shit in the arcade. Like, there are too many nerds. I am post-nerd check, but that's also because I'm post-shame in a lot of these things. And I think that is where a lot of the disconnect comes from with people that totally get me wrong on my channel, that they don't realize that I'm not real good at translating for the shamed, because I did my time there. I'm through it. I mean, I remember a time where I just couldn't take any more humiliation. Like, I can connect to how that felt. I can't connect to the thought processes that led me there anymore, because it's the sort of thing, I'm out, I'm not going back, right? That stuff is infectious. And so sometimes it's really difficult for me to predict how something is going to be perceived by an audience, because it's not even that we're not speaking the same language. We're not seeing the world through the same lens. And that's the reality of shame. The other thing is that I I don't experience shame the way, a typical man does. I certainly don't experience shame in the way a typical woman does. My God, my early career would not have gone down the way it did I feel the typical female shame. When I went from being a sexless nerd, being treated like a sexless nerd, to being treated like some turbo slut from Mars, that that may go down as the most confusing period in my entire life, because inside I was the same person. And I mean, that's part of the reason I go back to Judith Butler, flaws in the theory at all, because I mean, I live that. I was the same person on the inside, but, you know, 3 sets of hair extensions and a chainmail bikini later, I'm not a sexless nerd. I'm a turbo slut from Mars. I don't know why I'm going. I talked about Black Amazon of Mars by Leah Brackett earlier today, so it's in my head again. Nerd. But it's a weird experience to see how people judge you differently from the way you look on the outside, even when you're the same person on the inside. And I think to some of the things I did back in school, like there was a time, grunge was really in, and so one teacher made a comment once, you should show up to school ready to learn, and dressing that way isn't ready to learn. So to spite him, I showed up in a suit and tie for about a week going, is this what you meant? You know, now that would have a whole charge on it that it really didn't have in the same way it kind of did. I mean, somebody got mad at me saying I was throwing shade at Kurt Cobain on Tuesday's video. I don't get that. Um we were just talking to the period of time and how it was very different, and the conversation sort of meandered. Um the whole Nirvana thing, the whole Kurt Cobain thing was a major part of my teenage years. And I mean, one of the big things that people were like, about Cobain at the time is sometimes he wore a dress on stage. And sometimes I wonder whether, you know, if Kurt Cobain were around today, would he have made it longer? Because he wouldn't have been so doused in shame, because obviously we didn't understand a lot of the things he was dealing with, if he even really was a he. Who knows how he'd identify now, rest in peace. But uh you know I that's why I look at it now and go, we were really miserable in the 90s. The whole goth thing was a cope, right? People cannot understand what it was like to be in sort of, we didn't call it LGBTQ back then, but to be that and to constantly be told you're going to hell, you're um I was told there was no hope for me. There was an evangelical church down the street from my high school, and people told me that I was going to hell because I had spotted skin. And the Bible says that spotted skin was the mark of the beast. And that may have been what caused me to just read a whole bunch of religious texts cover to cover. because I was just like, what is going on with this mess? And we collected Chick tracts because it was our way of coping with shame, right? As much as we fought, as much as we stood up for ourselves, as much as we learned, how to throw a punch in response to gay bashing, you still felt a lot of shame because the world thought you were deviant, you were sick. And I jump forward to today and I see that repeating itself. And the thing is, because normal has been eroded and refined, and now what is quote unquote normal is almost interchangeable with what is ideal, I can totally see why there's a shit ton of shame in circulation. Like, it makes complete sense. And the challenge in dealing with shame is it's this two-pronged thing, right? There are rituals you can do to alleviate yourself of guilt. Apologizing, paying the debt, making things right. But shame is different. And the problem, if I'm right, the problem with all of the tactics that have been going on, and this is why I'm like, shit, it was right in front of my face. And I was almost there so many times. But the reason a lot of this, anti-racism, anti-homophobia, anti tactics is because they are all basically call-outs. It's a name and shame approach. And if you're adding shame to a person who is already deep in shame, and the shame is what's driving the behavior you don't like, you're just pushing the person further down. And, we see that with the whole toxic masculinity debate. We could replace toxic masculinity with shame, right? We could replace all the patriarchal theory in feminism, the way it's applied now, with shame. And it would be the same, right? We say don't shame, but people don't internalize what that means. They can't. They're living in too much shame. At least I didn't realize how much shame drove my behavior until I was out of it. Now, I'm not saying I'm completely free from shame. I'm just, I clearly didn't have as much of it as most people to begin with, but I have also worked through massive portions of it. That doesn't mean there isn't some left, but I've Marie Kondo'd a lot of my shame. It did not spark joy. And it really is hard to alleviate shame en masse. And I think that's why people end up flocking to some people who are actually kind of batshit crazy, but in the short term, and you're not supposed to say that, it's ableist, but there's a difference between, diagnosed mental health condition and batshit crazy, right? Bad crazy. And, in the short term, those people provide structures and explanations and justifications that are, it's not your fault, it's their fault. It's not your fault, it's the world's fault. It's not your fault, it's the patriarchy's fault. It's not your fault, it's, women's unrealistic expectations, or it's the trans people coming to get you. There's always an other to blame. And that alleviates some of the shame in the short term. The problem is a faceless mass, a horde, doesn't solve your problems. Your life doesn't get better. And when that shame comes crashing back down, and by that point, the internet guru you found has been found to have feet of clay, it just makes the shame worse. And the challenge of dealing with this, we can recognize that callouts don't work because it's something of a fundamental attribution error. Like, this isn't an evil person. This is a person feeling deep shame. It's very important to get that right, because if you don't, your methods are not going to work. And I see some leftists pushing back on this hard right now, because I think it's starting to come out that yes, the white fragility how-to guide to anti-racist is not working because it's heaping more shame on shame. So what do we do? And that's the challenge. And this is why I kind of crowdsource this stuff. Unfortunately, on Mondays, but not unfortunately, it was great that people talked about their shame on Monday's video. It's a much harder thing to know what would make a person feel less shame, because that's expecting, that's that pull yourself up by your own bootstraps thinking. And that if it was that easy, everybody would do it, right? When you're deep in something, it's really hard to pinpoint the source of what's causing it. A lot of it is immediate social group, family of origin type stuff, and people are so ashamed by that they, displace and deflect and project and put it on other people, where that's not really the source of their problem, right? So they can rage at another every day on social media, and it doesn't make them feel any less shame. In a lot of ways, it makes them feel more shame, which just drives the byproduct anger, and so we go around again, right? That's from that song, and so we go round again, but now and then we wonder who the real men are. Apropos, right? Joe Jackson, is that his name? I think. But yeah, it's sticky because it's very hard to deal with every individual person's shame in a mass communication or a YouTube video like this. All I can really say is I try to keep in mind, even when I'm going really hard on someone on social media, I keep in mind that that person is a person. No matter how poorly they're behaving, there is a person. And there are places I won't go accordingly. I can treat someone with, how do I put this? I can treat someone with, God, this is hard to verbalize, because I respect them as a person, and therefore there are places I won't go. I don't respect their behavior or the way they are choosing to communicate with people, because I do respect them as a person, and I do see their worth. And so I know that they're capable of better. And so some people I will go hard on. If somebody just seems to be really, really hurting, I'll go, especially if they seem aware that they're hurting, I'll go easier on them. What I won't do is allow them to get something with bad behavior, because that just rewards the bad behavior. But I know a lot of people misunderstand what I'm doing there, and they try to shame me for it, but that really doesn't work on me. And part of it is, when you're in a job that requires you to be highly sexualized in media, You are subjected to every form of shame you can imagine. It is not easy. I'm very glad I did it because now I can go and talk about this stuff as someone who's done it, right? I'm not just coming at it from a book. I'm not coming at it as an observer. I'm coming at it as someone who's done it. And I think that's why um, my outcomes and my methodologies are so different, because the work itself did not feel shameful. It was people's reactions that were awful. And, they automatically assume that you're stupid and you can't do anything else. And it's not something like, hey, this is a part of the human condition that I was seen as not the type that did this. I was not allowed into this space when I was younger. Let's see what it's like. It was like a scientific thing for me, and I think that partially saved me because I knew I'd been in the women's studies courses. I knew how the women who were depicted in the lectures were spoken about as either victims or sluts. You're either a victim or complicit. There's no, hey, this is a part of the human condition that nobody thinks these things about men who are depicted that way. You don't go, oh, Jason Momoa, Chris Helmsworth, those attention whore sluts. No, they just want attention from women. No, we don't do that, right? And so I'm like, let's give it a shot. But even prepared, it was hard. And I'm trying to think of how I did it. I mean, I went back to basics. For me, it's all frameworks. For me, it's all archetype work. For me, it's all, what is the intention? Are my actions matching my intention? Am I consistent? And I'm annoyingly consistent. And I think that I think is what saved me from shame, and maybe it's something you can try. As long as you're consistent in, your core values, your thoughts, your words, your behaviors, and you apply consistent rules to other people and yourself, it does do a lot to insulate you, at least against further shame. So you can work through the shame you've already been subjected to. And it can help alleviate those feelings of shame that you already have, because you challenge the assumptions that lead to the shame. That's the only thing I found really worked for me, is just being hellishly consistent in things. Not perfect, but I'm a heck of a lot more consistent than the average person. And because of that, when I do make a mistake, when I do start astray, when emotions overcome reason, I don't deviate too much. It's easier to get back on track, and so things don't seem hopeless. It's like, okay, I made a mistake there, not I'm a terrible person. Because when you work as much as I do to remain consistent, it's really hard to feel like a terrible person, because you can just look at the sheer amount of effort it takes. The sheer amount of hits I got to take to stay consistent. Like, I'm going to do the tough stuff now, so when the stuff I see coming down the pipe hits, I can go with that. And it's not two different sets of rules for two different sets of people. That's what worked for me. See if it works for you. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, ko-fi.com/Leanna K. Remember, there is a wait list for Leanna Cares. ko-fi.com/Leanna K. Thanks for watching. Be well and listen to It's Not Therapy tomorrow night. Link in the description box for the subscription link. Link in the description box for the subscription link. Thanks for watching.